Who's this? Oh, you're an entrepreneur? Oh, you're a real estate investor. Oh, you're trying to learn from those who did it. Well, come into the lab then. Put your white coat on, gloves on, notepad, and let's build, y'all.
Real estate experiment. What is happening, y'all? Today, I have my dear friend with me, Yonah Weiss. And the reason I said dear friend, we're just talking about this, how there's so many Weiss, and I don't really know if you and he's dialing in today from Israel, which is fascinating. What a time to be alive that we can be on the air together and discuss what you do best. So without further ado, welcome to the lab, Yonah. How's it going today?
It is my pleasure to be here, Ruben. I love your energy, and I love being here with you. And getting into the lab, rolling up my sleeves is what I do best.
That's right. And he's we got like I always say, we come in with the gloves. I got my notepad. I'm ready to go because I'm stoked because I don't say that to just say it. We haven't had anybody like you in the lab because you're an expert, a subject matter expert, and we love that because we believe that life is about experiments and it's about, people always say, how do I want to get into real estate? Well, there's so many umbrellas. So what are you experimenting in? What have you tried? And what are you doubling down on? So I'm very curious. How did it start for Yonah? Why, we know you as the cost segregation king expert in the space. That's right. Believe it or not, that's what people think. So tell us how you were able to capture all that experience and really niche down to very unique niche that offers a lot of value to people. You save them millions in taxes. So tell us how that came about. And when I say that, I mean the person, forget the business. I want to hear about you first, and then we can talk about how what kind of service you provide to the people.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I'm the cost seg king, right? I'm the expert in the subject matter, which is interesting because I don't have a lot of experience in the space. I've been in the space for about 3 years, which is not a long time to become an expert. But I always say the real expertise that I have is because of the team that I work with. And I could not be the cost seg expert if I didn't have a huge company, a huge team of the real experts that number one, I learn from everything I know. And number two, that they're really doing all the operation, the accountants and the engineers and the operations team that are getting it done. You know what I mean? So it's with complete humility that, and it's funny because a king, if you think about it, there's two types of kings out there, and this is kind of tangential, but it speaks to the point. There's two types of kings. There's a king that rules of dictatorship, right? That he appoints himself upon the people. And there's another type of king that he's accepted. The people choose him to be their king because they want him to rule over them. And, that's kind of how I feel. That it's like
I'd like to pick the latter as well.
I feel like, I could not do it if it were not for the people that were involved. But that really brings to how I got involved in the first place, because my background is in education and teaching. And I have a passion for learning and teaching. And one of my greatest skills is the ability to learn, very complicated things and boil it down to be able to teach it in a very simple way. And so that, when I got involved in real estate, I was doing a lot of different things and doing fix and flips and doing mortgages and brokering and all kinds of stuff. And I didn't really have such a passion for all those different things. It was just kind of like learning the ropes until I found and I came across this cost segregation. And it's like, here you're helping people all day long. I sit there and I help people save taxes. And, believe it or not, the feeling that you get when not only you're helping people constantly all day long, but it's the reciprocity in that is that people just love you, right? You're like, and so it makes the job not only fun, but it makes it like, wow, you feel like you're really making a difference. And I just love that. So that's a little bit of a nutshell, how I got involved, how I got that title, and why I love what I do.
That's fascinating. And it's so refreshing to hear, Yonah. Obviously, you're coming from a place of helping and solving a problem. And I think that's so important because, we talk about money, and it is important because you're saving tons of people money. But I think, it's all rooted with the whole, how do I add value to somebody? And you're adding tons of value to people's bottom lines. And we're going to get to that in a second. But real quick, because I'm not going to let you get away with this, because, you know, what we tend to have in the lab is humble individuals who come in and try to, like, you know, downplay, etc. That's fantastic. We know the importance of your team. That's definitely so great to hear, because I think we're reiterating this: systems, teams, etc. So kudos to you and your team. I do want to take a step back real quick, though. You said 3 years ago. What were you doing before that, and what led you kind of like down this path of, you know, you told us you're interested in education, you're interested in teaching just as much. What was that background like, so we can kind of get a feel of like, whoa, that's really possible to transition into that? Like,
Yeah, it's funny because I was a teacher for about 15 years, and you know, one day I kind of woke up and was like, hey, I need a little bit of a change. You do something different, and I actually literally, like, I just put it out there. I was like, started telling my friends, like, hey, I'm looking for something different. Like, any ideas, come your way. And I happened to run into a friend of mine who had been in the real estate industry. He was a commercial mortgage broker. His family owned, he was doing property management. His family owned a number of properties, multifamily buildings. And, you know, he grew up in the industry. And I spoke to him. It's just, you know, I ran into him on the street, literally. And we spoke, and I told him my ideas and how I'm looking to do something. He's like, listen, I have a lot of experience. I'm starting something new right now, a new venture, and I'd love for you to join me, and I'll show you the ropes. And it was within the commercial mortgage financing industry. And we're doing hard money loans, doing commercial mortgages. And that to me was like just an opening. Nice. So I was doing teaching. I had no idea, nothing about real estate. And it was just an opening to me. And I was so good at just learning the ropes and just learning everything that, you know, within a very short amount of time, I had originated, you know, tens of millions in commercial mortgages. And I was doing things that I never even imagined. Like, I didn't know. And then getting on the phone with bankers and, you know, talking the lingo after just a few weeks or months of being in it. I think it really just played to the fact that I had this background in teaching, and it's, you know, you kind of take on a role and you want to be able to be that person. So that was like one stepping stone to get me there. And then I tried out, like I said, I tried a bunch of different things. And I came to this company, Madison, that I work for, Madison Commercial Real Estate, Madison Specs, the largest national cost segregation company. And it was really just out of a whim. Like, I was introduced through a common friend, and it was more about this company than specifically cost segregation. And when they told me what they were doing, I was like, wow, that's fascinating. Let me learn about this. And I started, you know, sitting there with the accountants and and just studying everything. And then, believe it or not, I got on a podcast. You know, after being in the job for, you know, being in the role and doing what I was doing, business development, I got on a podcast about 2.5 years ago, and that literally like changed my life. That podcast, and I didn't know it, but that was the first of, you know, now at this point, Ruben, I lost count, but probably about 120 podcasts that I've done in the past couple of years, and that's really given me the more than anything else, I would say, the ability to, you know, spread this message to masses, and at the same time, it's kind of sharpening the saw, because every time you speak about something, you know, that you know, and you're teaching, and that's what I love. You know, when you teach a subject and you get the questions from a new person, every time you teach the subject, new questions and different questions from different people, that really sharpens this saw even more. I'm
so glad you're saying all these things, because I think they're so important for us to, first of all, understand what it takes to be a practitioner like yourself. The two things that I noted that you said is putting the idea out there. I think it's so important. I love this topic of, you know, ideas are just ideas, but then when you speak it to someone, write it down, or you don't even have to have it figured out of how it's going to happen. You just know you needed a change. And I think that's important. And I'm sure you're resonating with this as I'm speaking. But the second part that you said is sharpening, you know, the saw. It's so true. It's like, and that's, I literally got into real estate as an agent to help people to understand investors, how they thought. And it's crazy, because I think I'm learning more by helping people than the other way around. Like I'm literally learning along the way, and it's so fascinating you're saying this, because as you have to sharpen the axe every time. I'm going to ask you some questions and you might be like, oh, you know what, maybe it's never been asked this way. So that's fascinating. And I think honestly, you're a true embodiment of what we talk about when we talk about experimenting. So that's welcome to the lab. That's awesome. so I'll get right into it. You said, when you went to Madison, you saw what they were doing. There was a wow factor, and you talk about, what blew you away. Like, and maybe this is a great segue for like, what is cost segregation? Why was it like, wait, this is a given? Like, this is crazy. This is insane. What is it to the people who are listening, and what is it that originally, I guess the second part, that blew you away, particularly when you started getting into the space?
There were really two things that blew me away originally and continue to as time goes on. And one of them was that it became very clear to me that the tax benefits that are provided to real estate investors specifically are probably the number one reason why real estate moguls exist. That they can grow their wealth, they can grow their investment portfolio, and they have these tax deductions, these tax benefits that come along with it that are like almost basically unlike any other industry whatsoever. And seemingly they don't make any sense, right? Why the government would provide these benefits. Regardless, okay, let's just ignore the elephant in the room that, maybe it's the fact that Congress are real estate investors and that's why they get all these tax benefits for them. But that to me was like, okay, this is a wealth creating vehicle. And the second thing that coupled with that, which was really together with it, was that how few people actually know about it.
Okay, so what do you mean by that? Because, and you know what? Maybe we're jaded, and you as well. Because sometimes I'm like, oh, everyone, it's obvious, real estate, but maybe it's not. So let's touch on that for a second. When you say like not everyone knows about it, are we talking about people in their community? Because I think we're literally drinking all the same Kool-Aid. So maybe let's just talk about others. Like who are those people who are not aware right now, who may be listening? Maybe
most people, when I talk to people about cost segregation, if they've heard of it, they have a very basic understanding of it and don't really understand how it works. But that's okay. You don't need to know the mechanics of how everything works, okay? You don't need to know how a CMBS mortgage works, right? But if you need one, you go to the right person who's going to help you get it, right? You don't need to know how it works necessarily. But the thing is that what I found is that it's a tax benefit, right? It's an accounting thing. When most people think of taxes and think of account, their brains shut off. Okay, and this has just been my experience.
So defense mechanism, of course.
And what happens is people are like, oh yeah, taxes, right? You're right. Yeah, I have an accountant. That's why I pay an accountant, so I don't have to think about taxes. I don't have to deal with it. And the truth is, real estate investors are not any different than anyone else when it comes to this. And so they assume that their accountant is dealing with this, when in fact, most times they're not, because believe it or not, besides your cost segregation being an accounting method, it's really an engineering method more than anything else. So it's an engineering service that creates this accounting technique, right, with accelerating depreciation, but accountants don't do it. Therefore, accountants aren't even telling or dealing with this or telling their clients about this. And therefore it creates like this big void of, the people think it's taxes, so their accountants are dealing with it. The accountants, it's engineering, so they're not dealing with it. And they're not proactive enough to tell them about it. So basically just people are missing the boat.
Not us. So I'm so glad you said that, because originally that's what we think. Okay, well, maybe I need to find. You're saying two are not the same. So let's talk about that. If I have an accountant like, hey, Yonah, come on, I've been working with this guy for 10 years now. What do I do? Do I get a guy do you speak to the accountant? Do you work with them? I'm very curious as to how your business model works from a point A. Let's talk about that for a second, and then talk about maybe point A, what does it mean to go through this engineering method for those of us who are listening who have maybe heard of it or maybe are right now Googling you because I'm like, I really like this guy. He can save me a lot of money. So let's talk about that point A.
Yeah, the point A is we're not an accounting firm. Okay, Madison Specs, we deal specifically with cost segregation, and that's it. Which means, all right, and accountants don't do this. We're specifically dealing with this method. It's an engineering method. We have engineers who are not just experienced and knowledgeable in construction engineering, so they know how buildings work and how everything is built, but they also need to be simultaneously well-versed in the tax code to understand how the IRS has defined the building and how different components in the building depreciate on different schedules. And essentially that's what we're doing. An engineer is coming to the property and identifying everything in the building, and instead of saying you can take this tax depreciation deduction over a 27.5-year period, lump it all together and just divide it up, you can, by engineering method, cost segregation, you can actually segregate out the costs, meaning depreciate the property according to its specific components by identifying all those different things, how much the value of every tiny detail of, you know, the fixtures and the, you know, the light sockets and the furniture and every little tiny thing in the building, how much each one of those, how can I take those tax deductions at a faster rate? And so therefore accountants can't do this on their own. And therefore you need the, so yes, we work together with people's accountants, and we work directly with, you know, property owners as well. So it's really, there's two ways that, you know, our business model works. One is that accountants will come to us and say, hey, my client needs this done. Can you help him do that? Which, believe it or not, is a small minority because, as I mentioned before, accountants aren't that proactive for the most part.
Yeah.
The second model is, you know, we're going directly to investors, to property owners, and, you know, we have a whole sales team, you know, reaching out to them, and we have obviously a big business. So we have a lot of referral generating from that as well. And again, if you know about this and you're doing it, you want to tell all your friends about it. So it creates, you know, just kind of that, that referral business. So that's essentially how it works. That's what the point A method is.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine a lot of social currency from like, wait, can you believe what I just did?
Yeah.
I mean, and like, if you're not sharing this, I mean, it's that's fascinating stuff. So you talked about tax deductions at a faster rate, and you talked about that you like teaching. All right, so listen, Yonah, I hear you. I'm listening to this. This all makes sense, but why am I doing this again? Help us out.
You want to make sure if you're making money, okay, and let's just maybe take a step back and understand this paradigm shift, right?
Yeah.
If you're in corporate America, you have a W-2, whatever it is, you get your taxes deducted from your paycheck. Okay, you don't even see the money that you make. But with real estate, it's not like that. Real estate works that you make money, and all the income that you make after all expenses, you now have to report how much of taxes do you owe, okay? You have something called depreciation. And depreciation is not like it sounds. It's not a negative thing. Doesn't mean that your property is going down in value. It's a deduction based on the principle that things go down in value as time goes on, that you can take this tax deduction every single year and you get to literally deduct that against your income. So if you made $50,000 of income and you had a $20,000 depreciation deduction, so you wipe that off and you're only paying taxes on the remaining 30. That's how depreciation works. But the way that the tax filing works for real estate investors is, again, you can create more depreciation deductions with cost segregation and literally have no income tax liability whatsoever. And so there's not this principle that I need to cut taxes off, you know, right off the bat. No, the game of real estate is, you know, the strategy, like I mentioned right at the beginning of this, is that this is the method. Tax benefits is one of the main reasons why people are making so much money in real estate, because they're making all that money and they're creating these deductions that are not, you know, makes them not to pay taxes on all that money they're making.
Yeah. So, what are some of the? Thanks, Jonah, for this because I think you're definitely shedding more light for what would be considered a complex topic, of course. What are some of the nuances that you're seeing? So, and when I say that, let me make my question a little bit more clearer. Is it if we're looking at a property A and property B, that if we take that same formula, 2 + 2 = 4, or sometimes 2 + 2 = 5, like what is that formula that you guys are working like alchemists in the back there? Like, what's going on?
It's, believe it or not, it's pretty straightforward. It's literally just taking the property and finding all the things that are in the property and depreciating them at the faster rate that the IRS anyways says you're supposed to do. And this is the most interesting thing about cost segregation, is that the tax code has a whole list of every type of asset. Okay, if it's furnishings, it depreciates on a 5-year schedule. That means the value of the furnishings you can now take as a tax write-off over a 5-year period. Okay, the building structure is over a 27-year period, et cetera. Everything has a different rate that they depreciate on. However, unless you do cost segregation and you do this method, this like extra method, the extra effort that you have to do to find out what all these things depreciate on, then you're just lumping everything together on a much longer schedule, taking a lesser tax deduction each year. So the proper way and the accurate way to actually depreciate your property to take taxing is to do it each year according to all those different components and what the tax rate is for each one, what the tax deduction schedule for each asset in your property is. The IRS, however, does not require you to do so, which means, right, you can, because you own an investment property, you can do cost segregation, and actually you should be doing cost segregation and getting all these tax deductions up front. However, you are not obligated to do so, right? So the IRS isn't going to go out of your way and twist your arm to take extra tax deductions that
No.
Right?
They would never do that. So that's so interesting, and I think you're getting right next to my point. Is who is this for and who is it not for? Because you mentioned if you have a property, what type of properties, single family, multifamily, commercial, who is it for?
It's for anyone who owns an investment property or business property. It does not apply to your personal residence, but any type of property that is, again, investment or business property. The bigger the property is, or the more valuable the property is, the more benefit there is, because cost segregation is really a proportional tax deduction. So it's going to be proportional to your purchase price, and that's where depreciation comes in. Depreciation is set in stone the day you buy the property. And again, this is why I mentioned before, depreciation is not like what it sounds. It's not like your building's going down in value. Actually, your building's going up in value probably. What depreciation is like a theoretical deduction saying, because it's not intrinsic to the value of the property, it's saying the day you buy this property, based on the purchase price that you paid, you now get to take that value as a tax write-off, okay? And you do it and you spread it out over a certain number of years. However, it's not intrinsic to the building. It doesn't matter if the building's worth $10 million and you paid $5 for it, you can only deduct $5. And the opposite is true as well. It doesn't matter if you paid $10 million, right? Even though it was only worth $5, you now get to take that $10 million as a tax write-off. So it's based totally on your purchase price in the day that you bought it, and not how much value is actually remaining in the building, which is what it sounds like, right? Because if the building's already been in service and been around for 50 years, there's theoretically no more depreciable basis there. There's no more value in that building, but it starts over when a new person buys it, which is the incredible thing.
Wow. So I want to make sure that this doesn't slip through the cracks, because you started naming some things that I think people listening can kind of like put they can place. You talk about furniture, you talk about, right. I want to go down that rabbit hole just for a little bit, just to give people insight, and then they can follow up with obviously more of what that would look like that entails. Talk about a typical building. Let's say it's a company. You talked about the furniture. What if I have, photocopying machines? Like, can you maybe list us just a few items that people are like, wait, there's no way, really? I can depreciate that? That would, I think, give a little bit insight to our listeners as to, wait, this is applicable to me as well.
Yeah. And especially when and I'll list a few of those things, but especially when you start applying this and seeing how much of your building is actually, when you start to, compartmentalize things and start
Yeah.
allocating things to different items, how much value is actually in that personal property or those things that are not part of the structure. And that's really where and it can literally be 20, 30, 40% of the building value in these other assets. So there's really two main categories when we talk about cost segregation. Well, three. Well, really four.
No, nice.
There's land. Okay, when you buy a building, you immediately have to, when you buy any type of property, doesn't matter multifamily, doesn't matter any commercial, anything whatsoever, you immediately have to separate a certain amount for land. Land does not depreciate. So therefore you have to separate out, 10%, 20%, whatever that is, the value to the land. The remaining amount is going to be your depreciable basis. That's the amount that now you can write off. And now we're left with these three main categories. One is the structure. Mm-hmm. And the structural component, that's what depreciates on this 27.5-year schedule, okay? Which means, in simple terms, depreciation schedule means you can take that value and take as a tax write-off over that course period of time, 27 years, okay? It means you're taking a little bit every year for 27 years. The other two categories, and this is where cost segregation comes in, is we're segregating out, or we're separating, we're allocating from that main property, that main structure, is land improvements and personal property. Okay, these are the two categories. Land improvements, not to be confused with land,
Right?
Because again, we said land does not depreciate. What's on top of the land, it does. So landscaping has a value to it. Pavement, asphalt, okay, curbing. You have a parking lot, you have a walkway, you have sidewalks. Even landscaping, right? You have trees and bushes and shrubbery. All that stuff has value to it, like literally a lot of dollar value to it. You have fencing, okay, any type of signage, water drain systems, all that stuff, it's not land, it's what's on top of the land. And all that has a lot of value to it. So all that stuff depreciates on a 15-year schedule, which means we can accelerate that. And now we can take all that value as a tax deduction over a 15-year period, which is much faster than 27 years. And for commercial buildings, I should have mentioned this, it's on a 39-year schedule, but other type of, besides for multifamily. The other category, which is this where you start to think about it. You're like, okay, what's this personal property that depreciates on a 5-year schedule? And that's furniture, anything that's in the building that's not part of the structure. So think structure is like walls, floor, roof, windows, doors. That's structural. It's integral to the building. You need that. But if you have any type of furniture, any type of appliances, fixtures, equipment of any kind, you mentioned a copy machine, anything like that, any type, even stuff that's not, you wouldn't consider it movable necessarily, but it's not structural, like carpeting or vinyl flooring, because you can actually take that out. Cabinets, countertops. So you go into the kitchen, you're like, whoa, I got all these appliances and all the cabinets and the shelving, all of that stuff, the value of that depreciates on a 5-year schedule. Okay, so this is a huge amount.
And this is the which bucket again? Just so we
this is the what's called personal property.
Got it.
And it depreciates on a 5-year schedule, which means we're going to add up all the value of all those different things and say your cabinets are this amount and the carpeting is this amount, and it's going to add up to 20-30% of your entire building, your entire cost. And now we can accelerate that depreciation to a 5-year period, which is going to double or triple our tax deductions during those first 5 years.
It's so refreshing when the student who was once a student becomes the teacher, and then it understands a student's perspective and is able to break it down in such a simple way, the way you've explained. I'm not even like, this was very, very well explained in a very simple way. And I think that's the beauty of someone who really understands. They would say, like, when you understand something, you should be able to explain it to a 7-year-old. I tip my hat to you. That was fantastic. So at what point I heard all this, I'm like, okay, now I'm fired up. And it sounds like maybe, let's say I've owned an asset for maybe like 20 years. I'm like, shoot, did I just miss the boat with this guy? Or at what point do I start working with a guy like you? New construction, maybe earlier the better. Maybe it's now, as soon as possible, ASAP. What is that timeline that you find yourself working with individuals?
You can really do it at any point, meaning you can do it retroactively if you've owned a building for a number of years. A lot of people like to get it done in the first year of ownership because you want to take advantage of those tax deductions as soon as possible. However, like I said, you can do it retroactively. Even if you own a property for a number of years, you can go back and take the tax deduction. It usually doesn't make a lot of sense if you're going further back than 5-6 years, depending on the size and type of property. But theoretically, you can. But the best, case scenario is when you're dealing with someone who doesn't just own one property, but they're a real estate investor, and their plan is really using cost segregation as a strategy to, grow their portfolio. And the reason why I say that is because, we're not creating deductions out of thin air, right? The IRS is not in the business really to do you big favors. We're just front loading these deductions, which means when we're front loading it, in the later years, further down the road, we're going to have less deductions. Okay. What happens though is if you take a lot of deductions up front and you buy another building and you have deductions from that one as well, you can now, it trickles down from one property to the next, because your rental property income all gets pooled together and all your depreciation gets pooled together and can offset all of that. So it's really a strategy when you're dealing with multiple properties.
So in other words, a very scalable method for those who are out there looking to scale, which I'd like to think that's most of us in our space.
Right.
So that's good to hear. What would you say is the biggest misconception that you think people have when maybe you're sitting in front of them, or with your years of consulting, or you're noticing, you're picking up something like, maybe people aren't quite picking up at this, or maybe they just don't get it. Is it just being in the room with you or your team itself is the biggest awakening, or is there anything in particular at a granular level that you see is something that kind of jumps out at you?
There's, when I think about some misconceptions, I think people think like, basically what I just explained in the previous comment, which is, I'm just kind of I'm shifting the depreciation to a faster rate. And people don't understand the time value of money. And they don't understand that having more cash today of your own money, right? You can reinvest that. You can do a lot with that. It's going to benefit you because it's worth more now than it will be 5 years from now. And so therefore people don't understand that. And therefore they think that, okay, I'm having more deductions today. I'm just going to have more, less deductions later. I'm going to pay tax later on it. And it's not necessarily so, because as I just explained, it's really a scalable method that is working against your whole portfolio. So you can literally go, decades without paying income tax. And, when you're making money and with that money, you're reinvesting it, that's compound interest, right? Yes. You can multiply that exponentially, which that's, I think, the biggest misconception.
Yeah, I think that's a very important touch on that. It's always like the opportunity cost too of not doing this will cost you, which I think you made very clear. So that's fascinating. So you guys are you should take over the lab, man. You got tax and engineering. That's really mixing up like some serious test tubes and just making some magic happen. But obviously, all kudos to you guys that work extremely hard. And I can't tell you how impressed I am, and it's fascinating. We're definitely going to share tons of this. I want to hear a little bit now. You talked a little bit about yourself in the beginning. I want to bring it full circle. You told us about your strategy, told us about your team, told us how you can help multiple investors. You told us about the different buckets that cost segregation has to benefit you from the long term and front loading per se. Now, I want to get into the rapid fire questions to hear a little bit about what's ticking behind, what's driving this guy, right? I want to hear, like, do you have a favorite book out there that you're currently maybe really tapping into that you would recommend to our listeners?
There's a lot of books that I've read. One currently that I'm listening to is Unlocking Your Greatness. So it's a book by a guy by the name of Charlie Harary, and he's an incredible businessman, very inspirational speaker. I mean, if you've ever heard him speak, it's just, he blows you away every single time. And he wrote this book just about how to, maximize your time and maximize your effort and your potential on unlocking greatness. And because all of us have this potential inside of us and we're just not using it. So it's about kind of figuring out what life is about. And it's very profound, but at the same time, very practical.
I like that. No, we like profound books for sure. Diving deep. Thanks for sharing that. What do you think is the best habit that serves you every day, Yonah?
Prayer, real kind of introspection. And that's really what prayer is all about. It's not, it's realizing there's a greater power that is giving you a lot of your life and, providing you with everything and realizing that nothing comes from you. So it's humbling and it allows you to be, to know, what your focus is on life.
Absolutely. And to piggyback that, maybe our best tool that helps you excel throughout the day could be a notebook, could be anything, could be an application.
The best tool that helps me excel, I would say, LinkedIn is my biggest tool that I've used very actively for the past couple of years. And it's an incredible tool when you use it right. And I think I've been honing it down and learning as time goes on and using it in the right way.
We're not going to let that one slip through the cracks. What's using it right look like for you in your world?
Using it right is really like a 3-step process that they all intertwine together. So number one is just creating that brand, creating your personal brand that people know who you are and what you do and putting yourself out there. And so it makes it very easy for people to find out who you are, but it's a long game, which means it takes a long time. It's not happening overnight. So you need to invest a lot of time and effort into that. And so that's coupled with the 2 other processes that get involved there. One is creating content, which a lot of times is really about more than creating your own content. It's about engaging with other people's content. Okay. So because believe it or not, this kind of the triumvirate, if you will, with the third thing, they're all intertwined. Like I said at the beginning, they're all interconnected. It's the personal brand, and it's the creating content, but it's really helping people. Like that's really what it's all about is when you see, if you think about networking, okay, and that's how I view LinkedIn. LinkedIn I see is just like a networking event, 24/7, 24/6, right? Because we're in the Sabbath. But what I see it is literally, what do you do when you go to a networking event? So some people go to the networking event and think all by themselves. Where can I find clients? How can I tell people about me and give my cards to as many people as possible, right? But that's not really the most successful form of advertising. That's not the most successful form of business. Business is much better, and everyone will agree to this. It's much better doing business with someone who gets referred to you as a warm referral than it is by reaching out, trying to reach out cold advertising and cold outreach. Okay. And so networking is the best way to go about doing this because, and if you're doing it in the sense that I mentioned before, which is how can I help people? How can I go and find how many people can I help today? How many people can I go out of my way? Someone's looking for this. Someone's looking for a referral here. Someone's looking for, advice about this, so, whatever it is. And so that happens through the creating your content, and it happens through engaging on other people's posts, and it happens through, connecting with people and messaging people, whatever. And even if that helping is just like saying hello to someone, sending a nice message to someone, it's all about that. And so what ends up happening is that it all comes together and it creates an incredible business model.
Wow. I couldn't agree more. That's 100% how we are able to do business within our community. Like that's how we connected. And there's nothing, it's just a free flowing exchange and of information and network. And I think it's, you told it like it was. Thank you. Now you brought it home. I'm curious how you're going to answer this. 1 300 unit apartment building or 3 apartments, separate apartments of 100 units. Which one do you pick?
As a buyer?
As a buyer.
There's so many factors that go into answering that question.
That's why I'm so interested in the way you're going to answer, because you have so much of that, and I'd like to see where you're coming from.
I think there's no real right answer. They're both both right, depending on the situations and the markets and all kinds of things. But I would say in a lot of ways, actually, a 300 unit building, if you have the right systems in place and the right teams in place, it can be even better because you can cut down certain things in financing costs and all kinds of things like that. Management can be all one team in house, even though it could be also with the 300 units, but the 300 unit building, when you're talking about economies of scale, there's a lot of economies to scale there.
And because we're on the topic from the cost segregation perspective, do you think that method in itself would benefit, like considering if that building was split, and let's say they had the exact same thing, was split into three, and you mentioned portfolio. I don't want to get super granular, but I'm just thinking at a high level, do you see it being more effective on one building versus three if those were divided into three, or am I adding too many things in there? I'm curious.
Yeah, that would depend on really a few different factors, and it might actually be more beneficial to have the three properties for the cost segregation perspective, but because of one huge 300 unit building, but it might not, because they could be exactly the same. Meaning, you may have a 300 unit property and it's spread across 9 buildings, right? And you may have in the 300s, and each one of them is 3 buildings or what have you. So it really could be very, very similar in terms of the layout of the property, and that's what's going to make the difference more than anything else.
That's awesome. Listen, I had to do that. I just had to put it out there. But the best thing is, if you are facing that issue, I think we currently have someone in the lab and his team that can help you. So if that's the case, or if you simply want to get educated, I mean, from what you just heard today is just fascinating in a very clear way. Where can people find out more about what you and the company are doing for people, and just following you and as well from what you're doing from a brand perspective? Where can we find out more about you, Yonah?
The best place is LinkedIn, that's for sure. I'm very active on that platform, as is probably noted from the previous comment. You can go to yonaHweiss.com, where I have a lot of information there, and you can connect with me, get a free estimate. Obviously, my company, Madison Specs, is the biggest national company doing this, working in all 50 states. So you can check them out also anywhere, MadisonSpecs.com, or anywhere you might find cost segregation services.
Fantastic. And we'll make sure that we'll definitely include that in the show notes, and we'll definitely have you back into the lab for another great one. This was fantastic. I can't thank you enough, Yonah, for stepping in. And just like that, my friend, we are out.